This week is part 2 of this episode. You can hear part 1 at your favorite podcast platform or visionnewengland.org. Yeah, we talk about justice issues. We talked about pornography before. Is that this generation is so keyed in on justice. Of course, the church should be so keyed in on justice.
Yeah.
And we ignore the creation of a market that is unjust. Because to your point earlier, there's no marketplace if we're not buying it, supporting it through advertising as we click on pornography. And so we create the market, and it's not, we've had a number of people who do your kind of work on the Church in Action, and it's not church people don't do this.
Yes, there was a very a prominent study done in 2014, I want to say. I believe it was 2014, that surveyed Christian men or men who identified as Christian in the United States on their use of pornography. And I don't have all of the numbers in my head, so I'm not going to quote them, but it was something like 2/3 to 3/4 of Christian men admitted to consuming pornography. If not annually, bi-monthly or monthly, and about 1/3 of pastors admitted to using pornography regularly. We think that this is not a problem in our churches. It absolutely is. That was one of my forms of exploitation, was through pornography. And again, it goes back to that idea of the victimless crime. And I think it's also very much linked to, this is something that I do in private. And so if no one knows that I'm doing it, then I can get away with it. And I can still be sort of this like upstanding man in my community, this like upstanding Christian citizen. And I just, sometimes I have conversations with God about that, or I'm like, they think you don't know.
Yeah.
And I know you do.
I think, we've been spending a lot of time talking about making disciples. And I think this enters into it, because I think where we get to in our minds is, well, I'm saved.
Yeah.
And so that's not at risk.
Yeah.
Because I have my eternal salvation. I profess to believe the right things. And we ignore Jesus talks about, well, if you love me, why don't you do what I say? And it's the ones who do the will of my Father who will go to heaven. So we don't balance any of that out. And I'm not challenging salvation by grace, but I think we fool ourselves when we think I've said the right words. Right. And that actually gives me, Paul rejects it and we reject it, but we kind of practice it. And so this is I can't control myself, and therefore this is okay. And
I think, especially in American culture and in the American church, we do not give nearly enough space for men to feel safe being vulnerable. Because when we look at all of the research on pornography and on porn addictions and sex addictions, it is very rarely about sex. It is very often about unaddressed trauma. I have some very good friends who are recovered porn addicts, and we talk about this. And so often, porn was a means of coping with something else that they were going through, but they never made that connection to, shoot, I'm fueling a marketplace for sex trafficking. And just to give a quick plug to the Nathan Project and my friend Rick over there, he does great work running for men only groups in churches to address pornography. And he talks about these issues and stuff. So if this is like an issue in your church, absolutely go talk to Rick. He would love to chat with you and help you and help folks navigate those things. But I think, like, at the end of the day, if we don't let men be vulnerable and give them permission to not have to constantly buy into the stereotypical masculinity, then we're just going to see the problem of pornography perpetuate. We've got to let men heal.
And I read something, so I'd be interested in your perspective. I read something not too long ago that talked about another issue at play in pornography is that we have, and we guys don't like talking about the need, but we have a need for intimacy as human beings. God created us to be intimate and in fellowship with other people. And that's broken sometimes through trauma, sometimes through, we just don't know how to do it. And so we settle for substitutes that are less than what God intended.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it gets in the way of developing that intimacy, if an opportunity comes down the line of a relationship or to fix something going on in your marriage or something like that, pornography might offer a short-term fix to those feelings, but long-term, it literally changes the brain. It develops new neural pathways. It actually decreases ability to find pleasure in sexual relations, especially, with your spouse. So it actually, at the end of the day, porn does not help anybody. It doesn't help the consumer. It doesn't help the victims on the other side of the camera. Well, I should say there's one set of people that porn benefits, and those are the people who are profiting from it. It is a billion-dollar industry, largely off the backs of sex trafficking victims.
Yeah, you're mentioning about how it rewires the brain, and a pastor was sharing with me some data he had seen, and I forget the exact numbers, but something like 40% of guys in their 20s now experience sexual dysfunction.
Yeah, the average age of first seeing porn now is 11 in the United States.
Yeah, and it messes up their minds. By the time they're 20, they're not functional anymore, and so it's doing grave damage. Which, surprise, surprise, sin does damage. But it's not unlike, I think, the drug trade, in that we say we care about justice, and this is American society. I'm not speaking specifically of the church in this case, but the church is not entirely exempt either. But we say we care about justice, but we want our drugs, and we don't care how much damage that does to people all through Central America, and in our cities and in our towns. All along the way, the suffering and the injustice and the pain and the killing and all for people to make a profit, and we participate in it.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the most recent podcasts. You had Doctors Perez and Ripper on, which I just gotta say, Dr. Ripper is like one of the best names out there. Like. Such a good name. And one of them said something just so brilliant about, and tied it to like that in missions when helping hurts. It was a discussion about not having this inner transformation means that we can't properly do justice, because then we're all of our decisions are based on our own selfish needs and not how it impacts others. And when we think about justice work, so often we think about organizations like Amirah or Vision New England. We think about formal justice work, right? I had someone in my office ask me if our mission is to end human trafficking. And I couldn't honestly say yes, because I have an understanding that being in the here and the not yet of the kingdom, like, it's not going to end until Jesus comes back. I'm here helping folks that experience the aftermath in order to understand the love of Christ and that they were not built to be bought or sold, right? And so as organizations, where I'm coming to this to bring it full circle, as organizations, formalized justice work is often on a hamster wheel, because we may be like, we have a very effective program at Amirah. Like, we help people get out, they exit. We have a very low recidivism rate among folks that go through our rapid rehousing program. But there's always more. There's more, right? Until the rest of the church catches up on the need for the informal justice work of that internal transformation, so that every decision that I make is justice work.
Yeah.
Our organizations are just operating on this hamster wheel. And then we get into this problem of trying to communicate the transformative message of the gospel to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world looking at us being like, you guys are causing the problem.
Yeah, and so we've talked a lot about, and Doctors Rippert and Perez both talked about it. And that was a fun episode to do. Each one talking from Dallas Willard's perspective, because he's an expert on Willard, another talking from C.S. Lewis's perspective, because he's C.S. Lewis, about justice. And that was a fascinating conversation, I thought. So I'm glad you got something from it. But Willard, I think, is so helpful in saying it's the spiritual disciplines that God uses to affect that transformation in us. And so it creates the space for the Holy Spirit to work in us. And we're missing that. And so as a result, what happens is we try and keep the commands. So I try not to look at porn. I try not to get angry. I try not to be impatient. And we fall into a gospel of try harder.
Yeah.
As opposed to what Willard says so well, we try to be people who keep the commandments, as opposed to becoming the kind of person for whom it's natural to keep the commands.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And at the end of the day, where that comes down to is first being honest with ourselves that something internally is the source of me making these decisions. And I've got to address that, not the decisions. I've got to address the root. And second is the humility to ask for help.
Yeah.
Like, we cannot do this on our own. I love talking to, when it's done well and in safe spaces, talking to guys who have struggled with pornography. As a person who was on the other side of the camera in pornography, I enjoy having those conversations because that's like the reconciliation piece of things. And it's these guys that are being really, really honest with themselves and trying to address that root problem. I have so much respect for that.
Yeah.
And what churches have got to be able to do is in becoming a safe church, create spaces where people can raise their hand and say, I need help. And on all sides of the spectrum, and for churches to be able to effectively respond to both victims and perpetrators separately. Yeah. Because if we are just ignoring the perpetration, or if we are exiling the perpetration, then we are shrinking the church. Yeah. The church really is just a bunch of sick people trying to get well, right? And while we don't want to help victims and perpetrators in the same space, if we're not helping both, we are not in line with Christ.
Well, and it's so important that you bring up that we're trying to get well. The term for justification that we use today in the early church, it comes from a hospital term. Mm. And it's not till the Reformation that it becomes a courtroom term. We are judged righteous. And so this notion is what really the church started out as, and really should be, is we're all in recovery programs. It's just, AA people, their addiction is so bad, they have no choice but to do something. Well, I guess they have a choice, but they decide they must do something and they must change their lives. Whereas most of us have our own little addictions, but we can manage them well enough to cope with life, so we don't do anything with them.
Yeah.
And they stand in the way of us and God and other people.
Yeah, absolutely. As a person, with my personal lived experience, but then also as a Christian and someone who sort of operates in these spaces, I got to tell you, I still feel more comfortable in a pub than I do in a bar. Because in a pub, I know there's far more chances of honesty there and real conversations. And in our churches, we got to get to that point. Like, I love being in the back pew, having those gritty conversations with folks who just feel like they're not welcome in the space. That's where I feel like I'm most comfortable, is with folks who also feel uncomfortable. Because, man, until we are honest with ourselves as a church, we are not doing gospel work the way we should be.
Yeah, Dave Ripper has been helpful on this, and of course Dallas Willard, but there's a book called The Critical Journey that lays out some of this, and that most of our churches were good at, and we can debate this a little bit, but we're good at the experience you need to have to become a Christian. Mm-hmm. We're good at then teaching you stuff, learning, and we're good at getting you to serve. And for a lot of us, that's the end of our church structured spiritual growth.
Right.
And we're stuck. And the critical journey they talk about, there's this inward journey we have to do that typically will align with spiritual disciplines like silence, meditation, memorization, journaling, contemplative prayer. Some of the things are deep in church history. Not so much in which we can't use the term evangelical anymore, but what we would have called evangelical tradition, self-examination, and that was a big Wesley thing. And all those things that require time alone and thought and examination and maybe even therapy and spiritual direction and things like this, we don't help people into. And people don't know how to find their way into it because they don't realize that that's the next step they're supposed to be taking.
Yeah, and that's discipleship right there, is teaching people how to do those things, which takes time. And it means that, in creating disciples, we have to be disciplined.
Yeah.
Like what you were talking about service, like getting people to serve. So much of what I see churches doing in service are band-aid solutions for hemorrhaging problems.
Yeah.
Right? When folks come to us at Amirah and they say, like, what can we do? We'd love to do a project, we'd love to volunteer, et cetera, but they want to show up for 5 minutes and leave.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like 10% of the stuff that we do at Amirah, we really do need that kind of thing where we've got a project that takes a day or two and it's just got to get done, that kind of stuff. 90% though of what we actually need are people with the discipline to consistently show up.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with a hemorrhage over here, and 5 minutes of someone's time is a Band-Aid.
But and this is the problem in churches too, we are consumers more than we are disciples of Jesus Christ. And so you tell me you need something there, and I feel guilty, and maybe I even think there's some call there or conviction, and I do it, and I feel really good about it. But after the third or fourth time, maybe I don't feel as good, and it gets to be a little bit routine, and I don't like the 45-minute drive. And you were mean to me the other day, and I'm out. And because I was never there because I deeply loved people and want to disadvantage myself to serve them. I was there for me.
Yeah. And then we think that there's a difference between having that response and someone with an addiction. Both are just a massive dopamine rush. So when we don't get that dopamine rush in the same place, we go to the next and the next and the next and the more and the more and the more. And then what we don't realize is that we are now becoming consumers of dopamine off of someone else's pain. So then we want to keep people poor and keep people suffering so that they're always there for me to go get my dopamine rush when I need it.
Yeah. Wow. And that's a great explanation of what's going on with porn too.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And so Mary, you've talked about a bunch of the things that Amirah has been doing to step into this space. And I know you do things even outside of Amirah with consulting and research and things like that. What are things, if people want to get engaged with Amirah, or what would they do? What do you have coming up? How can they find out more?
Yeah, so every summer, month of June, we have this great program called Move for Amirah, which is basically a crowdfunding campaign. Every year, we've got churches that do this year after year after year, where they get their churches mobilized to do this, which is great. When we think about recovery and exit, like I said, it's like running a marathon every week. It's like climbing a mountain, swimming the English Channel, all of these things. Move for Amirah is a collection of folks who set a goal, a physical goal that's challenging for them, and then get folks to sponsor their Move for Amirah in order to support the women that we're working with. And it's a beautiful way that folks really across the country stand in solidarity with the women that we serve. Because of what we do, there's so much confidentiality and anonymity in it. Very few people who partner with us at Amirah actually ever meet the folks that we serve. But let me tell you, the folks that we serve know that this happens, and they see, last year we had more than 1,000 movers. They see 1,000 people doing very hard things just to raise money for them to be here and to get well and to find independence and to not ever have to go back to being sold for their bodies. So you can go to our website, amirahinc.org. That's AMIRAHINC.org. And sign up for Move for Amirah. It's really a beautiful way that churches and individuals and communities across the country get together to say, hey, we're anti-exploitation and we're with you here.
And if folks have trouble finding Amirah, because it's not the easiest spelling in the world, reach out to me at Vision New England. We'll get you connected. Mary, what are if there are folks, not anybody in any location can actively participate in the work you do, because geography is an issue, but folks who are where are you physically?
Yeah.
And are there ways churches and people can get engaged with you beyond Move for Amirah?
Yeah, so physically, our main office is in Beverly, Massachusetts. If you're on the North Shore of Boston, or if you're in Boston, give us a shout out. We have two amazing volunteer opportunities. We have our impact team and our advocacy team. Our impact team helps us pull off all of our events, all of the crazy projects that we have going on. Sometimes we got really big, communication efforts or complex things that are happening, and folks sign up to be on our impact team, and then we give them a shout out when we need help about once a month. And then our advocacy team works very closely with myself and a couple of other members on staff that advocate for better laws and policies, not only in Massachusetts, but also in the surrounding New England states. For this population. In January, in Human Trafficking Awareness Day, we had our advocacy team at the Massachusetts State House and spent the day knocking on legislator doors and educating them about sex trafficking and dispelling myths and really talking about the problem and how they can be part of the solution. So our advocacy team does amazing work helping to educate the folks that make decisions about policies, about how state dollars are used, about how to deal with incarceration, how to deal with poverty, how to deal with prostitution, all of those things.
And so, and of course, I'll say it for you. If churches or individuals want to pray or give, you're open to that too.
Please, yes. The work we do is extraordinarily effective, but it is expensive. There are not many grants, federal or state grants available in our area. And when they do become available, they're very few and far in between. And so the majority of our financial support does come from individuals, particularly individuals who are members of churches. And a good portion comes from our church partners. We're huge fans of that. And again, that goes back to that justice work, right? Like every decision that we make, including every decision about $1, every assignment that I give to $1 is a justice decision. So if you want to do justice work, every time you give to Amirah, it's a big justice win.
And so we've touched on some tough topics today, and sometimes it's discouraging, the scale of the problem and stuff. And I know it can be hard in your work because you can't tell everything that's going on because you need to protect people's confidentiality and their dignity. And so is there something you could leave us with before we go that's actually an encouraging story from your work?
I'm going to screw up the quote, but Mother Teresa said something along the lines of, if I look at the masses, I will do nothing. If I look at the individual, I will move. Mm-hmm. It's when we look at the one. All of our work at Amirah is looking at the one. We do individual care plans. Everything that we do is mapped out individually. Even though we have programs, the programs are structured in a way that it sort of gives guidelines to help people meet their next steps. We have someone in our rapid rehousing program who's coming up on their 2 years, is going to graduate soon. And in her nearly 2 years with us, she came to us after a long history of incarceration. She came to us off the street. She had no contact with her kids. She was dealing with her sobriety, unemployed, no history of employment, all of sort of the typical things that we see. Today, she has completed a vocational certification program. She is an apprentice. She has a living wage job with benefits. She has a beautiful relationship with her children now, who come and stay with her once a week. She has a gorgeous apartment. She's got a plan to take over her lease so she can actually stay right where she is, plugged into her community. And she said something to me a couple of weeks ago that just really stuck with me. She said, now that I know that I can do it, I'm not letting it go. Wow. Which goes back to what we were talking about with self-esteem, right? Mm-hmm. So when we combine dreams with resources, we create better futures. Because she had not only the opportunity, but she had folks believing in her and encouraging her and telling her you're worth it. We believed it before she believed it for herself. And today she believes she's worth it. And that makes everything. That's the whole point. That is the whole point.
Yeah. Transformed lives. Right? Yeah. That's the promise of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Mary, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your ministry and being our hands and feet in so many ways. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. So grateful for you, Charles, and for Vision New England, all the amazing work you all do.
Thanks. And thanks to our listeners. This program is created by Vision New England, which accelerates evangelism by helping the church make disciples, do justice, and foster unity so people care when we share Jesus and New England can be transformed. You can find more resources at visionnewengland.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. God bless you, and thanks for listening.